Hello and welcome to Miracle English Language and Literature Institute. I'm Professor Abha Sharma, and today I'm going to begin a new video series where I will be giving you the biographies and the literary attributes of the famous English authors. So today we'll take up the author who is so renowned that we often call him Father of English Literature. Yes, you have guessed it right. Today we are going to talk about Geoffrey Chaucer, the Middle English poet. Hello and welcome to Miracle English Language and Literature Institute. I'm Professor Abha Sharma, and this time I'm beginning a new video series on the biographies and literary attributes of English authors. So today we are going to start with a very prominent English author whom you all know because we often call him as Father of English Literature. Yes, you have guessed it right. Today we are going to talk about Geoffrey Chaucer. We usually count English literature from the Middle Ages because Anglo-Saxon period had hardly any prominent writers and their records are not there. But in Middle English, often called as Anglo-Norman period, which ranges from 1100 to 1500 AD, we find Chaucer's work more prominent, and that's why we call him Father of English Poetry. Rather, Matthew Arnold, in his critical work, The Study of Poetry, called him as the father of English literature or father of English poetry. Now, Chaucer was born between 1340 to 1342, probably in London. His father was a prosperous wine merchant, and we have very little details of his early life and education. But he is believed to have attended the St. Paul's Cathedral School, where he probably first became acquainted with the influential writings of Virgil and Ovid. But then in 1357, he became a page to Elizabeth, Countess of Ulster, wife of Edward III's third son. When he was working for Elizabeth of Ulster, he was paid a small stipend, enough to pay for his food and clothing. So, in his teenage years, he had to fight the 100-Year War in France, and at Rethel he was captured for ransom during the Brittany expedition of 1359. Thanks to Chaucer's royal connections, King Edward III helped pay him ransom. After Chaucer's release, he joined the royal service, traveling throughout France, Spain, Italy, and diplomatic missions throughout the early to mid 1360s. His travels exposed him to the work of authors such as Dante and Boccaccio. So, around 1366, Chaucer married Philippa Royat, a lady-in-waiting in the Queen's household. It's not clear that how many children he had, but he did have 3 to 4 children, and Philippa's sister Catherine Swanford later became the third wife of John of Gaunt, the king's fourth son and Chaucer's patron. So in 1374, Chaucer was appointed controller of the lucrative London customs, and in 1386 he was elected member of Parliament for Kent, and he also served as a Justice of the Peace. In 1389 he was made clerk of King's Works, overseeing royal buildings, projects, etc. He held a number of royal posts, serving both Edward III and his successor Richard II. Chaucer was the real founder of English poetry. He wrote in naked English, did not adulterate it with any foreign tongue like Greek or Latin. His poetry has been read and enjoyed continuously from his own day to the present day. In fact, he made a fresh beginning in English literature. He disregarded altogether the Old English tradition. His education as a poet was twofold. Part of it came from French and Italian literatures, but part of it came from life. He was not a bookman, nor was he in the least a visionary. He was a man of the world and of affairs. The most famous and characteristic work of Chaucer is the Canterbury Tales, which is a collection of stories related by the pilgrims on their way through the shrine of Thomas Becket at Canterbury. These pilgrims represent different sections of contemporary English society, and in the description of the most prominent of these people, in the prologue, Chaucer's powers are shown at their very highest. All these characters are individualized, yet their thoroughly typical quality gives unique value to Chaucer's picture of men and manners in the England of his time. The Canterbury Tales is a landmark in the history of English poetry because here Chaucer enriched the English language and meter to such an extent that now it could be conveniently used for any purpose. Chaucer's work fall into three periods. During the first period, he imitated French models, particularly the famous and very long poem Le Roman de la Rose, of which he made a translation, Romance of the Rose. This poem, which gives an intimate introduction to the medieval French romances and allegories of courtly love, is the embryo out of which all Chaucer's poetry grows. During this period, he also wrote the Book of the Duchess, an elegy which in its form and nature is like the Romance of the Rose, Complaint into Pity, a shorter poem, and ABC, a series of stanzas religious in tone, in which each opens with a letter of the alphabet in order. The poems of the second period show the influence of Italian literature, especially of Dante's Divine Comedy and Boccaccio's poems. In this period, he wrote the Parliament of Fowls, which contains very dramatic and satiric dialogues between the assembled birds, Troilus and Cressida, which narrates the story of the Trojan prince Troilus and his love for a damsel Cressida. The story of Griselda, in which is given a pitiful picture of womanhood, and the House of Fame, which is a masterpiece of comic fantasy with a graver undertone of contemplation of human folly. Chaucer's third period may be called as English period because in it he threw off foreign influences and showed native originality. In the Legend of Good Woman, he employed for the first time the heroic couplet. It was during this period that he wrote the Canterbury Tales, his greatest poetic achievement, which places us in the heart of London. Here we find his gentle, kindly humor, which is Chaucer's greatest quality at its very best. Chaucer's importance in the development of English literature is very great because he removed poetry from the region of metaphysics and theology and made it hold as 'twere the mirror up to nature. He thus brought back the old classical principle of the direct imitation of nature. Chaucer died at the dawn of 15th century, that is 1400, and was buried in Poets' Corner, Westminster Abbey, London, England. After Chaucer, there was a decline in English poetry for about 100 years, and these years are called as barren period in literature. From 1400 to the Renaissance, the period was bereft of literature. There was only a few minor poets, the imitators and successors of Chaucer, who are called the English and Scottish Chaucerians, who wrote during this period. The main cause of the decline of literature during this period was that no writer of genius was born during those long years. Chaucer's successors were Occleve, Lydgate, Howes, Skelton, Henryson, Dunbar, and Douglas. They all did little but copy him, and they represent an era of mediocrity in English literature that continues up to the time of the Renaissance. The large number of surviving manuscripts of Chaucer's work is testimony to the enduring interest in his poetry prior to the arrival of the printing press. There are around 83 surviving manuscripts of the Canterbury Tales in whole or part along with 16 of Troilus and Cressida, including the personal copy of Henry IV. Given the ravages of time, it is likely that these surviving manuscripts represent hundreds since lost. So this legendary 14th century Middle English poet Geoffrey Chaucer died on October 25th, 1400 in London, England. He died of unknown causes and was 60 years old at the time. Chaucer was buried in Westminster Abbey. His gravestone became the center of what was to be called Poets' Corner, a spot where many such famous British writers were later honored and buried. I hope you must have liked the video. Please like, comment, share and subscribe the channel. For more such biographies and literary attributes, I will be here again. Till then, bye bye.